Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a crucial stage, I think, of the caregiving journey. It's a step that, well, it's about shifting the weight, isn't it? Moving it beyond just your own shoulders.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
We're focusing specifically on Chapter 9, Building a Support Network. This is from that guide we've been discussing, Spotting Alzheimer's Early, A Caregiver's Guide to Taking Control by Jessica Lee and Joni Fisch.
Right, and Chapter 9, it's more than just advice. It's actually Step 9 in their whole 10-step playbook. They call it community ties.
Ah, okay. Community ties.
Yeah, and if you think about the earlier steps, they were maybe more about diagnosis, getting organized, building your own personal resilience. But this chapter, Chapter 9, it feels like a real pivot point.
A pivot how?
Well, it's where the caregiver, maybe stops trying to be the solitary hero, the one handling absolutely everything.
That was impossible long term.
Exactly, and instead starts actively building this sustainable infrastructure, a network around themselves. So our goal today is to really dig into that core message. You want to understand how the authors make this potentially huge task feel, well, actionable right now.
And see how it sets things up for the rest of the journey for you, the caregiver. So that's the mission. A quick but deep understanding of what this part of the guide really offers. We'll break down the main idea, look at the specific story they use to kind of hook you in.
That compelling evidence bit, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then, what Chapter 9 promises for the future? What's the single most important thing to remember from it?
The key takeaway.
Right. And maybe offer a little critique, does it really land? We're aiming to get into the details so you can grasp not just what they're saying, but why this step, building that network, is so incredibly vital for your own endurance.
Let's get into it then, because moving into Chapter 9, it means facing something really fundamental. The fight against isolation is just as critical as, fighting the disease itself.
Okay, let's start with that core idea, the foundation, because you're just hearing the title, Building a Support Network, it might sound a bit familiar. Didn't we already cover support?
That's a really sharp point, yeah.
I mean, if you've been following the book, you already went through Chapter 7, right? Which was titled Building Your Own Support System as a Caregiver.
Correct.
So, for the authors, Jessica Lee and Joni Fisch, what's the really crucial difference here? What makes Chapter 9 distinct?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, this distinction is probably the most important structural piece of this whole section of the book, and they are very, very deliberate about it. Think of Chapter 7, Building Your Own Support System. That one's really focused on, let's call it internal support.
Internal meaning?
Meaning mobilizing the people you already know, your immediate resources, sharing the practical load, the emotional burden with family members, close friends, maybe professionals you hire directly, like a home health aide or a nurse you trust.
Right, okay, so Chapter 7 is about your inner circle, getting them involved, assigning tasks, making sure someone covers the shopping, someone handles meds, someone gives you a break. It sounds very operational.
Exactly. Operational is a good word for it. It's practical, familiar territory for most people. But Chapter 9, Building a Support Network, it pushes you into something entirely different. The mandate here is establishing external support.
External, so outside that immediate circle.
Precisely. It's the shift from relying on people you know personally to proactively going out and accessing structured, often specialized, sometimes even anonymous community lifelines.
Lifelines, like what exactly?
Well, both local groups, face-to-face meetups, and also online resources, forums, things like that. The core argument in Chapter 9 is this. While your family and friends give you love, vital support, absolutely, they often can't provide the specialized knowledge or maybe that unique emotional validation that comes from connecting with other caregivers.
Ah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. That distinction feels really important. I mean, your brother might be great for venting too, but he probably doesn't know the latest about, say, managing sundowning or navigating the complexities of Medicaid waivers.
Exactly. Or maybe dealing with specific challenging behaviors. That's where the community comes in. So, the central argument of Chapter 9 boils down to this. The power of these local and online communities is crucial in two specific ways. One, reducing that profound sense of isolation caregivers often feel.
Which can be overwhelming.
Totally. And two, offering specialized resources information that your immediate circle just doesn't have. Think about it. Your sister might be happy to run errands. Fantastic. But does she know the ins and outs of advanced care directives specific to dementia? Or the best strategies for redirecting someone experiencing delusions? Probably not.
Right. That kind of niche, highly specific guidance often comes from people who are living it or professionals specializing in it.
Yeah.
You find that in support groups, not usually at the family dinner table.
That's it.
Yeah.
And finding that information yourself when you're already stretched thin, it's almost impossible. Which highlights the psychological necessity of this step, too.
Okay, so how does this fit into the bigger picture of the playbook? You mentioned it's step 9.
Right. So Chapter 9, Step 9, community ties, it's on page 128 in the playbook. And crucially, it comes directly after Step 8, emotional strength, which is on page 124.
The order matters.
The order is definitely not accidental. The authors seem to recognize that you, as a caregiver, can't realistically be expected to effectively reach out and build these community ties if you're already completely emotionally depleted, just running on fumes.
Makes sense. You need some emotional reserve just to make that first call or join that first online forum.
You do. So the implied progression is something like, first, stabilize your daily life. Get the basics under control, that's chapters 1 to 6. Then, share the immediate load with your family and close friends to prevent total collapse, that's chapter 7. Then, work on managing your own inevitable emotional fallout, the stress, the grief, chapter 8.
And only then, once you have maybe a tiny bit of breathing room, a little emotional energy, then you're ready to tackle building these more formal external support structures.
That seems to be the logic, yeah. The foundation of Chapter 9 is built squarely on the need to actively combat that burnout and emotional drain from Chapter 8 by leveraging these outside structures. It's like the book is giving you permission, saying, okay, you've shored up the home front, now it's time to bring in the wider cavalry.
It's an explicit acknowledgement, then, that even the strongest family unit can be pushed to its limit without that objective expertise, that shared experience you only get from a wider community.
Absolutely. The caregiver needs this external piece of armor, you could say, these community ties, for real long-term endurance. It's the moment the caregiver is encouraged to stop feeling like they have to struggle completely alone, and to recognize that true resilience in this situation, it's often a group effort.
Wow. That shift in perspective alone, from feeling like it's this private burden to seeing it as a shared challenge with available resources. That must feel incredibly freeing for someone reading this.
Hopefully, yes. That's the goal.
Okay, so we've got the core idea. Chapter 9 is about building that essential external support structure. But let's be honest, when you're deep in the trenches of caregiving, exhausted, overwhelmed, the idea of reaching out to strangers, joining a group, it can feel like just one more impossible task on the list.
It absolutely can, yeah. It takes energy you might feel you don't have.
So how did the authors, Lee and Fee, actually convince the reader, who's likely feeling that exhaustion, to take this potentially huge but necessary step? What's the hook? What evidence did they use to say, look, this really works, you need to do this?
That's a great question because motivation is key here. Since we don't have the full chapter text in front of us for this deep dive, we have to look at the surrounding material in the book. And it seems they strategically placed their most powerful piece of evidence right up front in the foreword.
Smart. Get it in early.
Exactly. It comes from a guy named Mark T. He's described as a friend of the authors and an early reader of the manuscript hailing from Columbus, Ohio. His testimony basically serves as the primary real-world validation for the whole 10-step process they lay out.
Okay.
But his specific mention of Chapter 9 feels deliberately placed to grab the reader's attention right away and show the impact of this specific step.
So it gives the advice immediate credibility. It's not just the author saying, do this. It's someone who actually used it, lived the experience, and directly credits this chapter with helping him manage.
Precisely. And the specific detail Mark T shares, that's really the essence of the promise Chapter 9 makes. He's reflecting on how he managed to get things under control, and he says, and I'm quoting the summary here, "Now, with the support network I built using Chapter 9, I've got my sister pitching in, and we even found a local group in Columbus that's been a lifeline."
Wow. That word. Lifeline. That's powerful.
Isn't it? It goes way beyond just saying, it was helpful or we found resources. Lifeline implies survival. It speaks directly to that feeling of drowning that so many caregivers experience.
Yeah, it transforms that abstract idea of community resources into something intensely tangible, emotional. Something Mark T. felt he needed just to stay afloat.
Absolutely. And I think the genius of that quote from the author's perspective is its specificity, too. Notice how he mentions his sister pitching in.
Right, so he did use Chapter 7 principles, the internal support.
Exactly. He confirms he leveraged that internal family support first. But then he emphasizes that the real game changer, the thing that brought genuine manageability, was the external resource, that local group in Columbus.
So it reinforces the author's core argument. You need both. Family helps, but the community connection was the critical addition.
Yes. It tells the reader reading the foreword, look, you can combine your existing family help with this formalized, specialized community support, and the result isn't just helpful, it can be a lifeline. It validates the whole premise of Chapter 9 right from the start.
And I wonder, too, the fact that it's Columbus, Ohio, that feels important. It's not some fancy resource only available in New York or L.A.
Good point, yeah.
It makes it feel achievable, relatable. It says this kind of support exists in regular cities for regular people. It counters that potential thought of, oh, that stuff isn't available where I live.
Totally agree. It grounds the concept. It connects the abstract idea of community support directly to the reader's potential reality. Someone struggling reads that and maybe thinks, okay, if Mark found a group like that in Columbus, maybe, just maybe, I can find something similar here.
So what do you think that Lifeline actually provided for Mark? What makes a local group so powerful?
Well, based on what these groups typically offer, it was likely a combination of things. First, probably huge peer validation. Just being in a room, or even an online space, with others who truly get it, who understand the unique frustrations, the grief, the weird dark humor sometimes, that feeling of, okay, I'm not crazy and I'm not alone.
That alone must be immense.
Immense. Second, specific tactical advice. How did you handle the insurance appeal? Or, my dad started doing X. Has anyone else seen that? Practical strategies you won't get elsewhere. And third, just sheer practical and emotional relief. A place to vent, to cry, to share successes, without feeling judged or having to put on a brave face for family who might be worried about you. It's a place to exhale. That's a perfect way to put it. A place to just exhale. Now, you raised a point earlier about focusing on the local group.
Yeah, I was thinking, by highlighting Mark's local group, does that maybe inadvertently downplay the value of online communities, especially for people who are geographically isolated or maybe just not comfortable with in-person groups?
That's a really valid critique to consider. Mark T's story is definitely a compelling hook because local feels tangible, human, connected. It works well for that initial grab. However, the chapter overview itself does explicitly mention both local and online communities, so the authors are aware of both. By featuring the local one first in the forward hook, maybe they aim to ground the concept in that face-to-face possibility. But the chapter itself absolutely must balance that by detailing the huge and sometimes more accessible value of online networks.
Which offer different advantages.
Totally different, like 24/7 access. You can log on at 3 a.m. when you're feeling desperate. Specialized forums for very specific issues. And a degree of anonymity that can be incredibly freeing, allowing people to share really difficult feelings they might hesitate to voice locally.
Okay, so the hook Mark T's Lifeline is powerful because it makes the concept concrete and emotional. But the chapter's promise has to deliver on the full spectrum, covering both the Columbus-style local group and the global online network.
Exactly. The hook gets you in the door by showing a real person found salvation locally. The chapter then needs to open that door wider to all the options. It essentially turns that feeling of quiet panic and isolation into a potential plan of action, armed with the proof that it worked for Mark.
Okay, so Chapter 9 gets you connected externally, gives you that lifeline, that broader support. Now, thinking about the book's structure, this is the second to last step, right? Step 9 out of 10.
Correct. Penultimate step.
So it delivers this external support, this potential stability. What does that stability promise the caregiver for the future? How does getting these community ties in place specifically set up the final chapter, Chapter 10, which is titled Wrapping Up Your Caregiving Journey with Purpose? Or Step 10, Meaningful Legacy.
Right, and this is where you really see the structural intelligence of the playbook. Think about it. Chapters 1 to 8 were largely focused on getting the caregiver to a place of stability, of just functional baseline survival almost.
Managing the crisis, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Managing the immediate crisis, shoring up personal resources, dealing with the initial emotional shockwaves. Chapter 9, by successfully establishing this wider external support network, it promises something crucial, a reduction in vulnerability, and fundamentally, the gift of time and mental space.
Time and mental space.
Yeah.
Because you're not constantly putting out fires alone anymore.
Exactly. It aims to move the caregiver from that state of constant reactive crisis management, always feeling behind, always dealing with the next urgent problem, to a place of more sustained endurance, a place where maybe, just maybe, some mental capacity gets freed up.
Which makes sense. Because if I'm drowning in paperwork, coordinating appointments, dealing with behavioral issues, and completely exhausted emotionally, I simply don't have the mental bandwidth to start thinking about abstract concepts like purpose or legacy.
You absolutely don't. So, Chapter 9, by providing those external resources, by sharing the informational and emotional load, it essentially buys the caregiver back some of that precious mental energy.
Okay, so the promise is breathing room.
Breathing room is the key promise. Yeah. And that newfound stability, that breathing room, it's presented as the absolute prerequisite for the big philosophical shift that Chapter 10 demands. Moving towards reflection, towards preserving memories, towards finding some kind of broader meaning in what is, let's face it, often a tragic and incredibly difficult journey. The promise fulfilled in Chapter 10 is that because you now have external support helping manage the logistics and reducing that crippling isolation, thanks to Chapter 9, you can finally lift your head up a bit.
And look beyond the immediate day-to-day struggle.
Right. Look towards these deeper things: reflection, purpose, legacy.
Let's dig into that phrase, meaningful legacy, a bit more. When the authors talk about this in Chapter 10, what exactly do they mean? Is it just about, like, making sure the will is updated, or is it something deeper?
It definitely includes the practical legal stuff, but its weight is much more on the emotional and maybe ethical side of things. In the context of Alzheimer's, meaningful legacy, as presented in Chapter 10's summary, seems to be about consciously seizing the present moment, capturing the essence of the person, their history, their values, before the disease progresses further and potentially alters or erases so much of that.
Capturing their essence. How?
It often falls into two main categories conceptually. First is what you might call emotional preservation.
Okay, what does that involve?
That's about active memory work, things like creating memory books or digital scrapbooks together, maybe recording conversations about their life stories, writing down specific anecdotes, family recipes, life lessons they shared. It's about actively creating a documented history, a biography almost, that the caregiver, the family, everyone can hold on to long after those memories might become inaccessible to the person with Alzheimer's themselves.
That sounds incredibly valuable, but also requires focus. You can't do that if you're constantly stressed and putting out fires.
Exactly. It requires that stability, that emotional safety net that Chapter 9 aims to build. It shifts the focus, even momentarily, from just mourning the losses the disease brings to actively honoring the richness of the life lived.
Okay, that's emotional preservation. What was the second category?
The second is ethical closure.
Ethical closure. That sounds serious.
It is, and it goes beyond just having a power of attorney document filed away. It's about ensuring that the individual's wishes regarding their care, their comfort, their dignity, especially towards the end of life, are fully understood, clearly documented, and then consistently respected by the care team and the family.
So making sure the care provided truly aligns with who they were, what they valued.
Precisely. It's about transforming the end of the journey as much as possible into one that reflects profound purpose and respect for their autonomy, rather than just, managing medical decline.
Okay, I see the connection now. Chapter 9 basically creates the necessary conditions. It implicitly asks the caregiver, all right, you've got some backup now. Your immediate operational needs are more under control. Your isolation is reduced. What are you going to do with this bit of reclaimed time and psychological energy?
Exactly. And the answer Chapter 10 provides is you use it to focus on reflection, purpose, and legacy. Because without those community resources, without that external network promised and hopefully built in Chapter 9, the caregiver risks getting permanently stuck in that survival mode, heading straight for the burnout detailed back in Chapter 8.
So the community connection isn't just about making the present easier.
No. It's presented as the essential tool that allows the caregiver to finally breathe, to reflect, and to engage in this incredibly vital, meaningful work of legacy building. It shifts their perspective, hopefully, from just surviving day to day to finding deeper meaning in the entire experience, however hard it is.
Which benefits both the caregiver's well-being and honors the dignity of the person they're caring for.
That seems to be the core argument the authors are making for why Chapter 9 is the necessary gateway to Chapter 10.
Okay, this framework really highlights just how essential Chapter 9 is in the whole process. It's not just an add-on, it's foundational for what comes next. So, if we had to boil it all down, if a listener could only remember one single thing from our discussion about this chapter, what's the ultimate key? The main synthesis?
I think the absolute core takeaway, the synthesis of Chapter 9's importance within the whole book's philosophy is this. Effective, sustainable caregiving demands dual-track support. You need both internal support, like we discussed from Chapter 7, and external support, the focus of Chapter 9.
Dual track, meaning you can't just rely on one or the other.
Exactly. That's the cornerstone. You absolutely need your family, your friends, that internal track for the love, the companionship, the help with daily tasks, the history you share. But the authors argue you also absolutely need the external track, those specialized local groups, those online communities for the expert knowledge, the objective perspective, and maybe most importantly, that shared experiential understanding that directly combats the profound isolation inherent in this role.
So it's a total rejection of the idea that the caregiver should or even can go it alone or even just rely solely on their immediate family.
Completely. The community connection, the external track, isn't presented as just nice to have or supplemental. It's framed as a necessary structural component. Without it, even the most loving and devoted family support system risks collapsing under the sheer weight of the specialized needs and the unique loneliness of the caregiver experience.
Because family, bless them, often just don't know what you need to know or fully grasp what you're going through in the same way someone else walking the same path does.
Precisely. If you only have track one, the internal support, you risk that isolation, you risk knowledge gaps leading to poor decisions, you risk resentment building up, and eventually burnout, because family often can't provide that specific objective expertise needed for complex medical, legal, or behavioral issues.
And if you only had track two, just external support,
well, theoretically, you might get information, but you'd likely risk feeling emotionally disconnected, losing that crucial bond and warmth that comes from your personal inner circle. The book's argument is that it's the balance and the integration of both tracks defining roles for each, leveraging both internal love and external expertise that allows the caregiving journey to achieve some measure of stability and long-term sustainability.
That dual approach is the essential antidote to being overwhelmed.
That's the core message, yes.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to our initial critique. The authors Lee and Fisch, they position this step actively building external ties as essential, proactive. Based on the framework, does Chapter 9 seem like it succeeds in its mission? And thinking critically, is there any potential downside or risk baked into this strong push towards relying on external community structures?
Overall, looking at its place in the structure and its stated goals, I'd say yes. The chapter appears highly successful in its primary mission. It clearly establishes that crucial pivot point we talked about, guiding the reader to look beyond their immediate personal relationships towards these structured, specialized community lifelines. That distinction itself is vital for comprehensive caregiver empowerment, and the chapter seems to handle this potentially sensitive step with empathy.
And the tone, does it fit?
It seems to. The book consistently aims to be a companion, a practical guide, right? Not some dry academic manual. By focusing Chapter 9 on very human needs, talking about lifelines, about reducing isolation, it seems to maintain that empathetic, actionable tone effectively.
Okay, but what about potential downsides, I'm thinking? When you strongly encourage someone to lean on external support groups, specialized resources, is there a risk that maybe the internal support system, the family, might start to, well, step back a bit?
That's a really important and sophisticated point to raise, yeah.
Like, could a family member think, oh, great, the Alzheimer's Association support group is handling the tough emotional stuff now, so maybe I can just stick to doing the grocery run? Does pushing external support potentially let internal support off the hook?
That is definitely a potential dynamic in any family system and a valid critique to consider. While the core text of Chapter 9 itself likely focuses primarily on the benefits of reaching out, the authors seem pretty careful throughout the book's overall structure to mitigate this risk.
How so?
Well, remember the sequencing. Chapter 7, demanding internal task sharing and commitment from family, comes before Chapter 9. The foundation of family involvement is laid first, framed as non-negotiable. Then, Chapter 9 introduces external help not as a replacement, but as an addition, a specialized toolset.
So it's additive, not substitutive.
Exactly. The framing seems consistently focused on empowering the primary caregiver, giving you more tools, more resources, more control, rather than giving your family members permission to disengage. The emphasis seems to remain on the primary caregiver coordinating this now wider network, managing the distribution of that shared load.
Okay, that makes sense. So the structure itself helps minimize that risk. The success of Chapter 9, then, lies in its proactive, empowering style. It acknowledges the tough emotional reality, but offers a very clear, structured path forward, literally, Step 9 on page 128. It makes it feel necessary and hopefully achievable.
Yes, I think that's right. It's an empathetic nod to the reality that this challenge often requires more than just love and family goodwill. It requires specific, sometimes external expertise and connection. The authors seem to deliver that message in a way that's structured, essential, and crucially, designed not to add more overwhelm to an already burdened reader. Hashtag outro.
And that brings us toward the end of our deep dive today, focusing on Chapter 9, Building a Support Network. We've really tried to meticulously unpack its core idea, seeing it as that essential, specialized extension of support out into the wider community.
Making that key distinction from the internal family support discussed earlier in Chapter 7.
Right. We looked at Mark T's story from the foreword, that powerful Lifeline anecdote, as compelling, real-world proof that this external connection can make a huge difference.
And we traced how the stability Chapter 9 aims to provide is really the necessary foundation, the prerequisite for being able to engage with the reflection, purpose, and meaningful legacy themes in the final chapter, Chapter 10.
It feels like this step truly solidifies the caregiver's position, moving them, hopefully, from feeling vulnerable and isolated to having a more structured resilience.
Yeah, that commitment to accessing specialized resources, to actively fighting isolation by connecting with others who understand. That really is presented as the key ingredient for long-term sustainability. For avoiding that burnout, the book works so hard to help caregivers prevent. Remember that dual-track support idea? It's critical. Love and history from your inner circle, specialized knowledge and endurance from your community ties.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought, maybe something provocative, tying back to Mark T's experience. If Chapter 9 offers potential lifelines, think about your own situation right now. What kind of resource feels like the most critical lifeline for you at this moment? Is it that very local, face-to-face peer validation like Mark T found in his Columbus group?
Or perhaps is it the broader reach, the maybe 24/7 access, the specific information, or even the anonymity offered by an online community or resource? Where does it feel most urgent for you to start building or strengthening your external community ties today?
It's a really personal calculation, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. But the knowledge that these resources exist and that seeking them out is a sign of strength, not weakness, that's the foundation Chapter 9 provides. And remember, the authors, Jessica Lee and Joni Fisch, are signaling that this journey continues. They've promised subsequent volumes.
Right, Volume 2 on navigating daily life with Alzheimer's, and Volume 3 on preventing caregiver burnout.
Exactly. So this initial 10-step playbook, culminating in finding purpose through community support and legacy work, really equips you with a comprehensive strategy to face those next phases.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge is control. And hopefully, after exploring Chapter 9, you feel a little more empowered knowing you absolutely do not have to walk this path alone. Until next time, keep digging deeper.